Hello watch enthusiasts and welcome to Watch Chronicler. In many ways, the pilot's watch is the purest form of sports watch. Whilst some predecessors existed, the modern pilot's watch found its roots in the dress watches of the interwar years. Converted for exploration or war with tougher cases, anti-magnetism and high contrast dials, these formed the basis of other military watches and in some senses the basis of modern dive watches too. On this channel, these watches have been extensively addressed, but today I'd like to return to the subject and give you what, in my opinion, are the very best options available this year in 2020. These are watches which not only give you outstanding quality, but also history or an ability to blend into modern life seamlessly, despite bringing the glory days of aviation to mind every time you glance at your wrist. So where should I begin? Well, a piece which has impressed me this year has been the Hamilton Khaki Pilot Pioneer Mechanical, a remake of the W10 pilot's watch produced for the RAF by Hamilton between 1973 and 1976. This compact but simple pilot's watch was, in my opinion, one of the purest, most distilled interpretations of a tool watch. With a matte black dial and simple legible markers added to the Arabic numerals, this watch was designed simply to tell the time and not to get in the way. Introduced in late 2019, this Hamilton showed itself to be a real hit as the ultimate all-rounder of a watch. Housed in a 33x36mm case with a 9.95mm thickness, this delicately brushed watch is entirely in keeping with the watch which inspired it, yet still provides 100-metre water resistance. It also retains the dial's rough surface on the original, in addition to the mildly yellow superluminova on the hands and indices to give that aged aesthetic when paired with the very 70s font chosen. Still, this watch very much remains a tool with the same highly tested legibility as on the original. As such, this watch doesn't over-ornament the past, but rather takes a successful design and translates it into a modern watch. Inside, the same attitude has been taken with the Hamilton H50 movement. This manual movement is based upon the well-known ETA 2801, an ETA 2824 with no automatic winding and different spring. The H50 takes it a step further and gives you the slimness of a manual movement with the practicality of an automatic, thanks to an 80-hour power reserve, twice that of the base movement. The only trade-off is the beat rate, which drops to 6 ticks per second. All round though, this might be the best sub-£1,000 vintage-style pilot's watch, priced at under £800. But if you want something more modern, what's the best option? Well, like the Hamilton, this isn't a watch released this year, but one which has instead gained popularity this year, the Ollech and Wajs P101. The P101 is designed to pay homage to the McDonnell F101 aircraft used during the 1950s, 60s and 70s, but isn't actually related to any vintage watch. Housed in a 39.56 by 12.5mm case, this watch keeps a smaller dive watch format, but adds a 12-hour rotating bezel in black PVD steel. The display of this watch is simple and traditional with luminous hands and markers at the cardinal points. It also has symmetry due to the date at 6 o'clock, and the brushed hands are an added delight. Even so, it still remains very much a tool watch, with drilled lugs and a clear ease of use. The construction of this watch is very clearly designed for a rugged feel in brushed steel with a screwed crown, sapphire crystal and 300-metre water resistance, quite a lot for a pilot's watch, I think you have to admit. Nevertheless, Ollech and Wajs, the brand to produce the first 1000-metre dive watch, know the difference between luxury and quality. Take the construction, which, unlike the 60% required by law to qualify as Swiss-made, is over 90% Swiss, really adding to the value of this timepiece. Furthermore, the movement is an ETA 2824, but which features bespoke sign components and a highly decorated automatic rotor, which isn't even visible behind the solid caseback, but it's always a pleasure to know that that's there. For under 1100 Swiss francs, I think it's an excellent deal. If you're enjoying this video, remember to like, subscribe and comment, and follow us on Instagram to always know about our videos, podcasts and articles, as well as all the watches you deserve to know about. Speaking of that, head over to watchchronicler.com to access the bulk of our content about watches and everything related. That Ollech and Wajs is a lovely watch, but frankly, if it's a mid-range to luxury level pilot's watch that you want, with a crisp and modern style, there's only one watch which I can recommend this year, the new Longines Spirit. Now, I reviewed this watch a few months ago, and without repeating myself, it was the biggest surprise of 2020. Taking inspiration from older Longines models, the Spirit comes in both 40 and 42mm sizes, and in three-hand and chronograph versions. Both are fitted with the very best the Swatch Group has to offer, from movements which aren't in-house as you would see in an Omega. In this way you have either the 27 jewel 54-hour power reserve L688.4 chronograph movement, which adds a column wheel to a very serviceable Veligio 7750, or the ETA 2892 based L888.4, which gives a 64-hour power reserve. In both cases, you get to benefit from the use of silicon balance springs to give a higher anti-magnetic rating. Even without these superb movements, a lot of the appeal of these watches is in the sheer quality of construction. The cases of these watches in brushed and polished steel are easily as good as those of Omega 5 years ago. Similarly, the finishing of every part of the dial and hands is staggering, as Longines have amalgamated the high-contrast Arabic numerals of their past with the sharp, applied metal details from a modern design. The hands are impeccably polished and painted, and the printing on the dial really is second to none. The final touch for me is the beautifully signed crown, which screws in to provide 100 meter water resistance. Where the pricing is concerned, this clearly is no cheap watch. Still, considering what's on offer here, I'm surprised it doesn't cost more. At the higher levels, vintage-inspired watches are hardly a rarity. However, it is a rarity to see a brand get one as right as with the new Hanhart 417 ES. Hanhart is a German brand which, through its work with chronographs in the 1930s and early 40s, set pilots' watches on a very new path. You see, they developed dual-pusher and monopusher chronographs with high-contrast dials and rotating bezels, which after the Black Forest was occupied by France in 1945, inspired the creation of the Type 20 and Type 21 chronographs for the French Air Force, which have become legendary. In their current catalogue, they have an assortment of pilots' watches, including true classics of their collection, yet one watch which they haven't reintroduced until now is the 417 ES, the stainless steel version of the watch worn by the German Air Force in the 1950s and popularised by Steve McQueen. Housed in a 42mm case with very classical proportions and with a less bulbous rotating bezel than we've seen recently from Hanhart, this is an extremely elegant watch, even if it is larger than the 39mm original. A key difference between this and more standard Hanharts is that the pushers are both steel and the hands are pencil-shaped rather than the 1930s cathedral hands more commonly seen. In fact, these hands go a step further, with a beautiful leaf-style second hand designed to be more luminous than to provide absolute precision. Elsewhere, this watch continues to perfectly recreate the original, as even the dial printing is replicated. Throughout this watch, it's difficult not to get the sense that this was meant to be something really very special, from the 100-meter water resistance to the gentle curvature of the hands to meet the dial. Inside this watch is a very simple Sleater SW510M, a manually wound version of the Sleater SW500, a clone of the Veligio 7750. This movement allows the watch to be slim, but also to have the traditional manual involvement of the original watch. This adds a 58-hour power reserve to a watch which, whilst not as technically advanced, is definitely a match for that Longines Spirit in quality and history. The final watch which I'd like to include is simply the best overall aviation timepiece of 2020, and in my mind there really is only one option. This is a watch which I took a look at a few weeks ago in London, and which impressed me to the core. This is the Breitling AVI Reference 765 1953 re-edition. Sure, this is another remake of a vintage watch, yet in quality, engineering and design, I think it remains a triumph. What sort of pilot's watch can you find for around £6,500? Well, you can get the loosely ETA-based IWC chronograph Spitfire, or perhaps a coaxial Omega Speedmaster with a very hefty discount. However, I don't think that either can hold a candle to this new Breitling as an overall product. A near facsimile of the staggeringly large for its time 41mm AVI 765, this watch recreates the early 1950s Breitling, intended to originally have a rotating disc to display chronograph minutes at 3. This was later replaced with an iconic 15-minute counter, which is rumoured to have been developed when Breitling were competing to produce a chronograph for the French Air Force. This was due to the 15-minute time slots for preparing aircraft for flight. Ultimately, this watch wasn't used by the French or Italian Air Forces, which also tested it, but it did go on to inspire such icons as the Breguet Type 20. This remake takes the earliest generation of the 765 and keeps its dimensions similar at 41.1mm by 13.95mm thick. The dial is an utterly stunning exercise, with the hands and dial having the delicate, mottled look of old paint. The rotating bezel is also a joy to use, and courtesy of a very interesting movement, the pusher action is flawless. The movement in question used is the Breitling B09, the brand's manual version of their successful in-house chronograph. This gives a 70-hour power reserve, 47 joules, whilst also adding a column wheel and vertical clutch for the absolute best chronograph action. I must say that with their new chronomat and vintage-inspired trifecta of Navitimer 806, Top Time and AVI 765, Breitling really are on a roll this year. But what do you think? What are the top pilot's watches of 2020 for you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, share and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. This is Armon from WatchChronicler.com. Out.